Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take complex foundational knowledge, strip away some of that academic jargon, and really give you the insight you need. Today, we have a really critical mission. Before we can even begin to talk about a single respiratory medication, we have to master the system itself, the anatomy, the pathology. So we're deep diving into Chapter 53, Introduction to the Respiratory System. Think of this as building the map. We need the map before we can understand why drugs like bronchodilators even exist.
And that map is absolutely essential. The respiratory system's job is, well, it's non-negotiable, right? Keeping us alive. It manages that constant exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. But what I think often gets missed is how delicate this all is. It relies on perfect coordination with the nervous system controlling the pace, the cardiovascular system moving the gases.
And even the musculoskeletal system, right? The bellows.
The bellows, exactly. So when we talk about pharmacology, we're talking about intervening in that very delicate balance.
Okay, so let's unpack this architecture. We basically have two key components.
Well,
The upper respiratory tract, so your nose, throat, windpipe, and then the lower respiratory tract.
right, which houses the bronchial tree and, most critically, the alveoli.
Functionally, how do they differ?
The upper tract is really the pre-processing center. Its main job is ventilation,
Just moving air.
just moving air in and out. It's
Yeah.
a highway system. But the lower tract, with the bronchial tree and those tiny air sacs, the alveoli, that's where the magic happens.
Respiration.
Respiration, the actual gas exchange.
And the upper tract is also this incredible defense system. I mean, it's a fortress against all the stuff we breathe in.
It really is. When air enters, it's not just filtered by nasal hairs. That's the first step. It's also immediately warmed and humidified by superficial blood vessels.
Why is a pre-warming step so important?
It's all about efficiency. Warmer, wetter air means oxygen can diffuse into the bloodstream much more easily. It just primes the whole process.
And then there's the most impressive defense, the one that works 24/7.
The mucociliary escalator.
I love this concept. Can you give us the visual on that?
Sure. You have to picture a continuous moving sidewalk that's always running toward your stomach. It's lined with these specialized goblet cells that produce a sticky mucus. That mucus traps everything: dust, pollen, microorganisms.
Okay.
And then underneath that mucus, you have these tiny hair-like projections called cilia. And they beat in this coordinated wave, physically sweeping all that contaminated mucus up toward your throat.
So you just swallow it.
You swallow it, and the stomach acid just destroys whatever was trapped. It's a brilliant self-cleaning system.
So you're preventing contaminants from ever reaching the lower tract.
Yeah.
And you've also got other physical defenses like the larynx and the epiglottis.
Exactly. They're the gatekeepers, snapping shut when you swallow. And even if some particles do manage to slip past, the system isn't done. The lower tract is kept, virtually sterile by macrophage scavengers, the immune cleanup crew, and these things called mast cells.
And mast cells are ready to release histamine.
Instantly. It kicks off a really rapid inflammatory reaction to expel or just neutralize any invader.
Okay, so that brings us down to the central event, respiration, in the alveoli.
Yes, the functional units of the lungs. They are designed for one thing: rapid diffusion. This is where oxygen gets into the blood and CO2 gets out.
And to do that, the barrier the gases have to cross is incredibly thin.
Extremely thin. It's called the respiratory membrane. You don't need to memorize all 6 layers, but you do need to visualize just how thin it is. We're talking less than a micron thick.
Wow.
It's basically 2 layers of cells with a tiny space in between. The thinner it is, the faster the gas exchange.
So what keeps those tiny, delicate sacs from just collapsing? That brings us to surfactant.
Surfactant is absolutely crucial. It's a lipoprotein, and its essential job is all about physics.
Okay.
It dramatically reduces the surface tension inside the alveoli. Think of surface tension like the stickiness of water. If that tension is too high, the sacs will collapse when you breathe out.
Which is a condition called atelectasis.
Precisely. Surfactant prevents that collapse. It keeps the sacs open so diffusion can happen continuously. Without it, the whole system just fails.
All right, let's talk mechanics. The control center for ventilation, the actual act of breathing, is deep in the central nervous system.
It is. It's in the respiratory center, in the medulla. The medulla is constantly monitoring our internal chemistry through what are called chemoreceptors.
And they're mostly looking for CO2 levels.
Exactly. They are keenly sensitive to acid levels and especially carbon dioxide in the blood. If CO2 levels rise, the medulla stimulates the inspiratory muscles, your diaphragm, to increase the rate and depth of breathing until that balance is restored.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for us, because this is where the drugs come in. The autonomic nervous system.
Yes, that balance.
We have the parasympathetic system through the vagus nerve, which causes bronchoconstriction, tightening of the airways.
And that's countered by the sympathetic nervous system. When that system is stimulated, it increases your breathing rate and depth, and crucially, it causes dilation of the bronchi.
Bronchodilation. A freer, easier flow of air.
And that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with drugs for something like an acute asthma attack. We're trying to amplify that sympathetic signal to force the airways open.
That push and pull is such a key pharmacological insight. Okay, let's shift to pathology. What happens when these defenses fail? Starting with the upper tract.
It's mostly about inflammation up there.
Yeah.
The classic example is, the common cold. A virus gets in, triggers the mast cells to release histamine, and that kicks off the whole inflammatory cascade.
So swelling, mucus, congestion.
All of it. And that swelling, especially in children, can be a risk because it can block the tube to the ear and cause an ear infection, otitis media.
Right. And we see that same basic histamine-driven inflammation in seasonal rhinitis or hay fever.
Same mechanism, just a different trigger. An allergen like pollen instead of a virus?
And you mentioned we have to highlight a key safety concern here, sinusitis.
Yes. Sinusitis is inflammation of the lining inside the sinus cavities. And since those sinuses are, they're bony, they can't stretch. So the swelling causes this intense pressure and pain.
What's the real danger there?
The danger is that if the infection isn't cleared, microorganisms can, in some rare cases, travel up those passages and potentially spread to brain tissue. It's a serious localized infection.
Okay, so as we move down into the lower tract, the stakes get a lot higher because now we're threatening gas exchange directly.
That's right. Let's start with the non-obstructive issues.
Yeah.
First is atelectasis, that alveolar collapse we mentioned.
What causes that?
It can be outside pressure, like from a collapsed lung and pneumothorax, but the most common cause is an internal blockage. A mucus plug or swelling that stops air from ever reaching the alveoli.
Which is why post-op patients are always told to cough and deep breathe.
Always. You're trying to prevent that. The signs you'd see are maybe crackles in the lungs, dyspnea, difficulty breathing, fever, and probably hypoxia, low oxygen.
And then there's pneumonia.
Pneumonia is inflammation of the lungs from an infection. And the massive inflammatory response there it rapidly compromises that razor-thin respiratory membrane, making gas exchange incredibly inefficient.
And what about just simple inflammation of the airways?
That gives you bronchitis. The bronchi swell up. If it's acute, it usually goes away. But if it's chronic bronchitis, that inflammation and mucus production it doesn't clear.
And that can lead to something worse.
It can lead to bronchiectasis. This is a chronic, really destructive disease. The bronchial passages become permanently dilated and scarred. The body replaces those protective ciliated cells with fibrous tissue, and you're stuck in this endless cycle of infection and destruction.
Which brings us to the biggest challenges in respiratory pharmacology, the obstructive diseases.
Exactly. These limit our ability to move air, not just through inflammation, but through physical blockage or constriction.
So let's start with asthma.
Okay, with asthma, here's the ultimate distinction that dictates the drug choice. Asthma is about hyperactive airways. The obstruction is potentially reversible.
And it has that fascinating two-part response.
Yes. The immediate phase, within 10 minutes, is a massive histamine release that leads to acute bronchospasm, the muscle constriction.
Immediate tightening.
Right. But then, 3 to 5 hours later, you get the delayed phase. That's the cytokine-mediated inflammation, the edema, the mucus that sustains the blockage.
And if that acute bronchospasm just won't stop.
If it doesn't respond to typical treatment and becomes life-threatening, that's the emergency we call status asthmaticus.
So for asthma, we're using bronchodilators for immediate relief and anti-inflammatories for prevention. Now, let's contrast that with COPD.
Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The key pharmacological distinction here is that the obstruction in COPD is not fully reversible.
Why not?
Because it involves permanent structural damage, usually from smoking. It's an umbrella term for two main pathologies.
Okay, so what are they?
You have emphysema, where the key damage is the actual destruction of the alveolar walls. The lung loses its elastic tissue, so the air sacs hyperinflate, but then they catastrophically collapse when you exhale, trapping stale air inside.
And the other one.
Chronic bronchitis, which we touched on, it's defined by permanent inflammation, excessive mucus, and swelling in the larger airways. Both of them lead to severely poor gas exchange, and the diagnosis usually involves spirometry to measure a low peak flow rate.
So the core insight is asthma is reversible spasm, and COPD is managing symptoms of permanent damage.
That is the crucial distinction for any treatment plan, and there are two other severe obstructive conditions to mention.
Okay.
Cystic fibrosis, or CF. It's a hereditary disease where these thick, copious dehydrated secretions literally plug the airways, leading to widespread infection and destruction.
And finally, the one related to surfactant.
Right. Respiratory Distress Syndrome, or RDS. You often see it in premature newborns who just aren't producing enough of that stabilizing lipoprotein. A similar but acute collapse in adults is ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, which can result from a major trauma or burns.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've seen that this simple act of breathing relies on these incredibly effective layered defenses.
It really does, from the mucociliary escalator to that fine-tuned autonomic nervous
It
system.
means that every single drug you'll encounter in respiratory care is going to target one of three things.
Exactly. Opening the airway, so bronchodilation, reducing the inflammation with anti-inflammatories, or clearing out the secretions.
And understanding the why is everything.
It is. Knowing if the obstruction is a reversible spasm like in asthma, or if it's irreversible structural damage like in COPD, that is the single most important diagnostic step before you can even think about selecting a treatment.
And to leave you with a final thought on all this, think again about how fragile the system is. We talked about those type 2 alveolar cells that produce surfactant. This one microscopic component is the only thing preventing a complete collapse of the system. What other organ system is so absolutely reliant on the perfect constant function of such a tiny fragile component for the survival of the entire organism? It really shows you the precision required for every single breath we take. That's it for this deep dive. We hope this foundation gives you the clarity you need for everything that comes next. We'll catch you on the next one.